James and Laura Cartwright seemed like the perfect couple, living an enviable life in the quiet suburbs of Surrey. But behind closed doors, James harbored a deadly secret, an affair with a younger woman that would push him to commit an unthinkable crime. What started as passion and deception quickly spiraled into murder, lies and betrayal that would shatter a family and shock a nation. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. James Cartwright was the kind of man everyone admired in the quiet suburbs of Surrey. At 42, he had achieved what many people spent a lifetime chasing: a successful career in banking, a large house with a manicured garden, and a family that looked perfect from the outside. His wife, Laura, was devoted, caring, and deeply in love with him. They had 2 children, Sophie, 7, and Oliver, 5, who were the center of their world. From morning school runs to evening dinners, the family routine painted an image of stability, warmth, and happiness. Neighbors often waved as James jogged past with Sophie riding her small bicycle alongside him. Friends invited them to social gatherings, impressed by the picture of a family thriving together. But this picture-perfect life hid secrets that not even Laura could imagine. Behind James's charming smile and courteous gestures, a storm was brewing. His mind was restless, weighed down by a secret he had been carefully nurturing for months. It started innocently enough, as many affairs do: flirtatious messages exchanged during lunch breaks, brief encounters under the guise of professional meetings. Victoria, a young and ambitious real estate agent, had entered his life under the pretense of helping him purchase a new property. Her presence was exciting, a spark that made James feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. The casual thrill, the stolen moments, and the intensity of their secret connection slowly consumed him. He knew what he was doing was wrong, yet he couldn't stop. James grew careful, learning to balance his double life with precision. Every detail was planned, leaving his phone in another room when speaking to Victoria, keeping his email and social media private, and inventing excuses for late nights at work. He avoided leaving evidence, but couldn't avoid the tension that gnawed at him each day. The more Victoria demanded attention, the more claustrophobic his life at home felt. Laura remained blissfully unaware of the cracks forming in the seemingly flawless marriage. She believed in James's loyalty completely, trusting the man she had chosen to spend her life with. The pressure mounted with each passing week. James's mind oscillated between guilt and desire. He started to notice Laura's subtle suspicions, though she hadn't confronted him yet. She asked innocent questions about his schedule, casually inquired about phone calls he claimed were work-related, and sometimes lingered with a glance that seemed to penetrate his carefully constructed facade. For the first time, James realized that a single mistake could unravel everything. The thought of losing his family, his reputation, and everything he had built became unbearable. Yet, despite the fear, the temptation continued to pull him toward Victoria. Their meetings grew more secretive, more urgent. Each encounter left James exhilarated, but anxious. He knew he was playing a dangerous game. In his heart, he understood that one wrong move could destroy the life he had worked so hard to maintain, and so he carried on, balancing on the razor's edge of desire and fear, unaware that the choices he was making would soon lead to consequences far beyond what he could imagine. Laura began to sense that something was changing in her home. At first, it was tiny details that seemed insignificant, easy to dismiss as the stress of everyday life. James had always been a man of routine, but lately, he was slipping. He would leave the table during dinner without explanation, his phone never leaving his side. Texts and calls would come at odd hours, and sometimes he would answer them in another room, speaking in hushed tone. Laura told herself it was probably work-related, that stress or deadlines could explain his behavior. Yet a seed of unease had planted itself deep within her, refusing to be ignored. She began observing him more closely, unconsciously tracking his movements, noticing the nervous tick in his hand when he glanced at his phone, the faint lines of worry forming across his forehead. Something in the way he smiled felt different now, forced in a way she had never seen before. The charming husband who had once made her feel safe and adored now seemed like a stranger living under the same roof. Laura felt a gnawing tension, a feeling that her life was slowly shifting into a space she could not yet name. Meanwhile, Victoria's presence in James's life was becoming more demanding. What had started as casual meetings had escalated into constant messages, urgent calls, and unexpected visits. She wanted more than secret lunches and hidden conversations. She wanted attention, commitment, and proof that James was hers. Each notification from her phone added pressure, reminding him that he could not control the storm he had unleashed. James's anxiety grew with every passing day. He was trapped between two worlds, one filled with comfort, family, and social respect, and the other filled with desire, temptation, and risk. The thought of being caught terrified him, yet the idea of ending the affair felt impossible. As Laura's instincts sharpened, she began noticing small inconsistencies in James's explanations. He claimed to be working late, but sometimes she would find his car parked in unusual places, or catch him in minor lies about meetings and errands. The unease became harder to ignore, gnawing at her quietly like an invisible thread pulling her toward a truth she was not ready to confront. At the same time, the tension in the house was palpable. Sophie and Oliver sensed their father's restlessness. Even young children are sensitive to shifts in the household atmosphere, and their laughter, once constant, now sounded hesitant. James, meanwhile, wrestled with a mounting sense of dread. Each day was a balancing act, each lie a thread he feared might snap. The pressure of keeping Victoria satisfied while protecting his family became suffocating. He began making more secretive movements, erasing messages, hiding notes, and avoiding conversations that could reveal even a hint of the affair. But no matter how careful he was, cracks began to appear, tiny glimpses of his double life leaking into the world around him. In this growing tension, a storm was quietly forming. Laura's suspicion was not yet focused, but it was there, simmering. James's desperation was building, creating a dangerous mix of fear and obsession. Neither could see the future clearly, but the trajectory was inevitable, a collision of secrets, lies, and desires that would soon erupt in ways neither of them could contain. The calm before the storm was over, and the first sparks of danger were beginning to ignite. The night it all spiraled out of control, James was restless and agitated. Rain fell steadily over Surrey, the droplets pattering against the windows of his spacious home, creating a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound. It should have been a calming night, one to share quietly with his family, but instead, James felt the weight of the secret he could no longer ignore. Victoria had insisted on meeting him at his house, claiming she had urgent matters to discuss. Every instinct in his body screamed that this was a mistake, yet he felt powerless to say no. When Victoria arrived, the air was thick with tension. She entered with confidence, unaware of the storm that was building inside James. He tried to maintain control, to mask the panic that churned in his chest, but as the minutes passed, the conversation turned more demanding. Victoria's expectations were no longer subtle. She wanted commitment, attention, and proof that their affair was more than fleeting. James's mind raced, calculating, rationalizing, and panicking all at once. Every option seemed dangerous, every action potentially catastrophic. As the evening wore on, a struggle of emotions overwhelmed him. Fear, guilt, and desire collided, clouding his judgment. He knew he could not let this situation continue. The risk of discovery was too high. Laura's intuition was growing stronger, and the children's lives were at stake. The thought of losing everything he had built, of facing public shame, became unbearable. In a split second, panic overtook reason. James attacked. The encounter escalated quickly. Victoria resisted, shocked and unprepared for the sudden violence. In the struggle, she subtled, hitting her head sharply against the corner of the fireplace. The sound echoed through the empty house, a sickening confirmation of what had just happened. James froze, staring at her lifeless body, heart pounding, The reality of his actions struck him in a wave of horror, but his mind immediately shifted to damage control. He had to think fast, had to make it appear accidental. James dragged Victoria's body into the rain-soaked yard, wrapping it in a tarp he had hidden in the garage. He loaded her into the trunk of his car, his hands trembling, mind racing with fear and calculation. He drove carefully, as though the slightest misstep could expose him, and stopped in the woods on the outskirts of town. With meticulous care, he left her body in a secluded spot, hoping the authorities would classify it as a robbery or an unfortunate accident. Each movement was deliberate, cold, yet fueled by the panic that threatened to consume him. By the time he returned home, James was exhausted, drenched, and trembling. He cleaned the house, erased messages, and attempted to restore a semblance of normalcy. When Laura entered later that night, she noticed nothing unusual. James's charm and composure were intact, and yet beneath the surface, he was unraveling. The guilt gnawed at him, whispering of inevitable consequences, while his desperation to keep the secret alive grew stronger. That night, the perfect facade of suburban life cracked irreparably. What had started as a passionate affair had transformed into a nightmare of murder and deceit. James knew that nothing could ever be the same again. The quiet streets of Surrey, which had once seemed safe and ordinary, now held the shadow of his crime, and somewhere deep inside, a chilling understanding settled. The lie that had protected him would soon demand a price far greater than he could imagine. The morning after Victoria's disappearance, Detective Inspector Hannah Moore was assigned to the case. She was methodical, experienced, and known for noticing details that others overlooked. Victoria's body had not yet been discovered, but her sudden absence raised alarm bells. Friends reported her last known movements, and the pattern of her life suggested she had not left voluntarily. Hannah began to piece together the timeline, scrutinizing every detail, her work, her appointments, and the people she had interacted with in the days leading up to her disappearance. James appeared at the scene as a concerned, worried friend, the picture of grief. He offered help in the search, spoke to the media, and even suggested places where Victoria might be found. To the casual observer he was the perfect, devastated companion, yet Hannah noticed subtle inconsistencies. His answers were rehearsed, his emotions too controlled, and his gestures sometimes delayed, almost as if he was calculating the next move even while acting mournful. Something about his composure felt unnatural, and it immediately drew her attention. As Hannah began examining evidence, she noticed small but troubling details. CCTV footage from nearby streets captured a car matching James parked in unusual locations late at night. Phone records revealed calls and messages between James and Victoria that conflicted with his stated whereabouts. Even minor witnesses mentioned odd sightings, a man resembling James near the woods at hours when he claimed to be at work. These fragments of evidence began to create a web that led closer to him, though no one could yet confirm his involvement. Laura, still unaware of the affair in full detail, began to feel the weight of her own suspicions. Something in James's behavior had changed in recent weeks, and his late-night absences now seemed more sinister than before. Her intuition was sharp, a quiet alarm sounding in the background of her mind. Though she had no proof, small signs, the hurried wiping of surfaces, disappearing messages, and subtle evasions began to make her uneasy. She sensed that the safe world she had built around her family was cracking. Meanwhile, James grew increasingly anxious. The investigation, though not yet focused on him, created pressure he could feel in every movement, every glance, and every breath. He monitored news reports obsessively, wondering what Hannah Moore might uncover next. Each minor slip, each overlooked detail, seemed like a potential thread that could unravel everything. He had thought that moving Victoria's body and erasing evidence would be enough to protect him. But the scrutiny of a skilled detective was different from ordinary life. Every decision now carried the weight of life-altering consequences. Hannah's investigation intensified. She cross-checked phone records, bank statements, and witness accounts, slowly connecting the dots. Each clue, though seemingly small in isolation, formed a growing pattern, pointing towards someone close to Victoria. The tension between the apparent normality of suburban life and the hidden darkness beneath it became more apparent with each discovery. By the end of the week, the quiet, controlled world James had maintained began to crumble. For James, the walls were closing in. Every glance, every sound, and every phone vibration reminded him that the investigation was moving steadily closer to the truth. The careful balance he had maintained between family and affair was unraveling. And for Hannah Moore, the pursuit of justice had only just begun. The question looming over Surrey was no longer whether Victoria would be found. It was whether the person who held her fate in their hands would be exposed before it was too late. James felt the walls of his carefully constructed life closing in. Each day brought more scrutiny from Detective Inspector Hannah Moore, whose meticulous work was slowly uncovering the cracks in his story. Small mistakes, once insignificant, now loomed like warning signs. A deleted text recovered from his phone hinted at conversations with Victoria that contradicted his statements. Receipts for hotel stays and unexplained transactions painted a picture of deception, and the timeline of his movements began to conflict with his alibi. For the first time, James realized that the elaborate web he had spun could no longer protect him. Laura, meanwhile, had begun to notice patterns she could no longer ignore. Hidden receipts tucked away in drawers, unexplained withdrawals from the bank, and deleted emails that left strange gaps in her husband's digital footprint all pointed to secrets he had tried to keep buried. She didn't yet know the full extent, but a chilling suspicion began to take hold. The man she had trusted completely, the father of her children, the husband she loved, might not be the man she thought she knew. Each discovery tightened the knot of fear and doubt in her chest. As Hannah dug deeper, the pressure on James mounted. She uncovered messages between him and Victoria that revealed manipulation, coercion, and threats, evidence of a dangerous obsession he had tried to keep hidden. The detective's work was methodical, and every detail she documented became a piece of the puzzle pointing squarely at him. James tried to maintain his composure, but the tension was unbearable. The perfect facade he had maintained for so long was beginning to crumble under the weight of scrutiny. In a desperate attempt to regain control, James made a fatal error. He approached a local handyman, offering money in exchange for silence. He assumed that with someone else's cooperation, he could divert attention and protect himself. But Hannah had already anticipated such a move. Every contact he made was being documented, every attempt to cover his tracks monitored. His desperation only strengthened the case against him. Each lie, each bribe, and each manipulated story added more evidence of his guilt. Laura, guided by her instincts and a growing sense of dread, began to connect the dots herself. She started compiling notes, tracking James' behavior, and quietly observing his every move. What she discovered was shocking: hidden accounts, secret communications, and proof of an affair that went far beyond a casual fling. The image of the man she had trusted was unraveling before her eyes. Fear, anger, and betrayal mixed together, creating a storm of emotions she could no longer ignore. The combination of Laura's suspicions and Hannah's relentless investigation made James increasingly erratic. He found himself trapped between the fear of being discovered and the consequences of his actions. Each day brought new evidence that could expose him, and the lies that had protected him now threatened to destroy everything he held dear. It was no longer a question of if he would be caught, but what. The noose tightened with every passing moment, and the life he had fought so hard to maintain was slipping through his fingers. As the case against him grew stronger, James realized that the perfect life he had built was gone. The children he loved, the wife he had once adored, and the reputation he had maintained were all hanging by a fragile thread. The truth, unstoppable and inevitable, was closing in, and soon the consequences of his actions would be unavoidable. James Cartwright's arrest was swift once Detective Inspector Hannah Moore gathered enough evidence. The trail of messages, phone rooks, and witness statements left little room for doubt. When officers arrived at his home, James remained calm on the outside, but inside, a storm of fear, regret, and desperation raged. The perfect life he had carefully maintained for years had finally crumbled, and the consequences of his actions were unavoidable. The trial that followed captured the attention of the nation. The courtroom was packed with reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers, eager to witness the fall of a man who had appeared so respectable. The prosecution presented a damning case, forensic evidence, placing James near the woods on the night Victoria died, messages revealing threats and coercion, and financial records showing attempts to cover his tracks. Each piece of evidence painted a chilling picture of premeditation and deception. Laura sat quietly in the courtroom, heart heavy but composed. She had learned the full extent of James's betrayal, his lies, his secret life, and the murder he had committed to protect himself. The realization was devastating. The man she had loved, the father of her children, and the center of her life had committed an act so heinous that it shattered her world completely. Yet amidst the heartbreak, there was a growing resolve. She would survive this, protect her children, and rebuild a life that James had tried control through fear and lies. Witnesses took the stand, revealing James's obsessive behavior and the steps he took to conceal the affair. Experts analyzed his communications and actions, explaining how someone could appear normal while hiding such darkness. The prosecution highlighted the stark contrast between James's public persona, the devoted husband, loving father, and respected banker, and the man capable of murder. The courtroom fell silent as details emerged, leaving no doubt that James's perfect image had been a mask for a calculating, desperate killer. James's defense tried to argue that the death had been accidental, that Victoria had fallen during an argument. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury listened intently as Hannah Moore recounted the investigation, showing how meticulous work and attention to detail had uncovered the truth. Even James's attempts to manipulate witnesses and destroy evidence were laid bare. With each revelation, the facade he had built for years crumbled further, leaving only the reality of his guilt. When the verdict was finally delivered, James was found guilty of murder. The sentence was severe but just, reflecting the gravity of his actions. As he was led away, the weight of his choices became undeniably clear. The life he had risked, the family he had betrayed, and the woman he had killed could never be restored. For Laura, the path ahead was uncertain but filled with determination. She vowed to protect Sophie and Oliver, ensuring they would grow up safe and loved, despite the shadows left by their father's crimes. The story of James Cartwright became a cautionary tale. Appearances can deceive, secrets can destroy, and even the most ordinary lives may hide the darkest truths. The quiet streets of Surrey, once a symbol of safety and normalcy, would forever remember the night a husband killed to keep his affair secret.